Little man shop for like 3 weeks.
Yeah, all right. All right.
I'm actually warmed up.
All right, Jabosai. All right, the good night is such a schos Baruch Hashem. First of all, a tremendous thank you to Yonason Kaplan for preparing this morning's breakfast. And if you see him, please just make sure to give him a thank you. Also, and Saeed was the one who coordinated it, but Saeed needs a refuah shlema. Apparently a little bit under the weather, so Americans just have a refuah shalema. And I will say to thank all of our sponsors for this morning share, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for Tafshin Pehei, our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tilson Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drushos this year as a zchus for Besaros Tovos Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Dr. Linda Weinberg, in loving memory of her husband of 53 years, Dr. Paul Weinberg, Peretz Moshe ben Avram David, in commemoration of his 4th yard site, Avram and Shane D. Kelman of Eretz Yisrael, in memory of their parents, Jerome and Bernice Kelman, Alexander, Frederica David, and our week of learning sponsors, Tzvi and Shane D. Shear, in the Schusser Refuah Shlema for Tinok ben Miriam. And to thank our breakfast sponsors, Eric Schaefer. Where's Eric? Shkoyach to Eric. Welcome back to Eric Chera. Some of you may remember Eric. He used to live here, and now we live in Dallas.
Yes, sir.
Dallas, Emir Hashem. What's the weather there like? Nice. Okay, that was a good answer. And Elio Roseboro. Where's Elio? I saw him before. Elio was here, wasn't he? Oh, Elio's in the back over there. To Elio, thank you again for this. Thank you to Elio and Tarek for the sponsors for the breakfast. And Shkoyach. And again, a tremendous thank you to Saeed for coordinating, to Yonason Kaplan for executing a true zechus. Well, so with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful day. All right. Right. There are breakfast sponsorships open for tomorrow. Right. If anyone would like. Also heater sponsorships. This is great. This is good. The truth is, I don't know if you feel. I feel the sun's coming up. You can feel it's coming in. About when we get to the bottom of the dot, about an hour from now, it's going to be all the way in. All right, so let's begin. So today's daf is Kuf Yod Zayin 117. Let's actually just back up to the Mishnah quickly, even though we did the Mishnah yesterday, but it's a short Mishnah. So the Mishnah says as follows. The daughters of Tzlavchad went ahead and inherited essentially 3 different portions. Now we'll have to see exactly what this means. Did they actually inherit 3 different portions, overlapping portions? We'll discuss this in the Gemara. What were the 3 portions they inherited? Number 1, their father Tzlavchad had a portion because he was one of the Jews who left Egypt. That's portion number 1. Furthermore, again, Tzlavchad obviously had a father, right? His father was Chefer. Right? So ultimately, again, they had a portion. Tzlavchad had a portion in his father's property. So obviously, as we've established, when someone inherits, even when they pass away, their heirs inherit their inheritance position. So therefore, they had a portion in Tzlavchad's father Chefer's possession. And number 3, V'shahaya b'char notel shnei chalakim. Lastly, Tzlavchad was a Bechar. So because he was a Bechar, because he was a firstborn, ultimately again he had Pishnami, at a double portion. So those are the 3 portions, right? So I'll have to see exactly what that means, but I will say Kof Yod Zayin Amud Aleph 117a. So the Gemara says something very interesting. Tana Kimam Damar Liyotzi Mitzrayim Nischal Ka'aretz. So we'll see. We are going to see something very interesting. A fundamental machlokes, fundamental dispute. How was Eretz Yisrael divided up? Or amongst whom was it divided up? So the Gemara says, our Mishnah reflects the opinion that Eretz Yisrael was divided up amongst the Jews who left Egypt. Liyotze Mitzrayim. Let's analyze this a little bit. First, I'll take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Liyotze Mitzrayim Nischal Ka'aretz. Kilomar, Lebay Ha'ara. Actually, you know what? Let's read the Gemara first. Tisanya. Rabbi Yoshia says, Liyotze Mitzrayim Nischal Ka'aretz. Eretz Yisrael was divided up amongst the Jews who left Egypt. Shneimar l'shemos matos avosam yinchalu, because the pasuk says, literally again in accordance with the names. In other words, the whole pasuk is ach begorol yichalek haaretz. The land will be divided up by a lottery. Remember again, Eretz Yisrael is divided up by lottery. Lishmos matos avosa min chalu. Literally, again, by the names of the matos, the tribes or the families of their fathers, they will inherit. See, even though, again, obviously the lottery is being performed, they both say, so just to understand what's happening over here. Obviously, Eretz Yisrael is divided amongst the Jews who entered into Eretz Yisrael. The shaila is, how was that division affected? So as we're going to Rabbi Yoshia says, the division essentially, again, was made in accordance with the Jews who left Egypt. Let's watch this. Lishmos matos avosa min chalu ela mani makayim la'ila techalika aretz benachalo. So we'll say, so again, here's the problem. How do you say that the land was divided up amongst the Jews who left Egypt when the pasuk says la'ila techalika aretz benachalo? Ultimately, again, for these you shall divide up the land as an inheritance. So I will say now, la'ila sounds like who is it talking about? To the Jews who entered into the land. So how do you reconcile those two different things, right? On one hand, the pasuk says, "Lishmos matos avos min chalu," right? Ultimately, again, that the land is inherited by those who left Egypt, right? And then it says, "La'ila techalek haaretz," right? Then it's here. Use that shit. That's ripped. So from Shal, show this once. Okay. You never know what you're going to find in the shul sukkah. You never know what you're going to find. All right, so the Gemara says as follows. So how do you reconcile those two ideas? So the Gemara says, listen to this. La'ila ka'ila. It means that the land is divided. So the land is divided amongst those who go ahead and enter the land, like those who left Egypt. How so? To go ahead and remove the children. So we'll say, okay. So now let's analyze this a little bit. So Rabbi Shmuel is of the opinion that the land of Israel was divided up amongst the Jews who left Egypt. Now, obviously, when you see that statement, you understand, and of course, like inherently doesn't sound right. Why doesn't it sound right? Because the Jews who left Egypt died, right? For the most part, remember again, anyone who was above the age of 20 when they left Egypt, the Pashtus died. So which means that entire generation was wiped out. So how could the land be divided amongst the Jews who left Egypt? So take a quick look at the Rashbam. Rashbam in the it's 5 lines up before it gets wide. It's the first Rashbam in the Gemara. Liyotzi Mitzrayim nischal ka'aretz, kilomar leboy ha'aretz nischal ka'aretz k'fi cheshbon shel yotzi Mitzrayim shenatluha b'toras Yerusha me'avoseim k'lefi cheshbon harishon shenu b'shana shniya l'tzeisim Mitzrayim nischal ka'aretz. Essentially, that the land, we according to this Rabbi Yoshia, the way the land was divided up is we looked at the Jews who left Egypt. The land was divided up amongst them and then given to their descendants. But the division itself was made in accordance with the Jews who left Egypt and not in accordance with the Jews who actually entered into Eretz Yisrael. Now again, we'll put a little bit more meat on those bones in just a little bit, but that's our first opinion. So Rabbi Yoshia understands that Lemaisa, again, land of Israel was divided up amongst the Jews, or by the Jews, not by the Jews, for the Jews, right? The division was done in accordance with the Jews who left Egypt, even though, again, here's the chap, even though those people what? Themselves never entered into Eretz Yisrael. Very important idea. Rabbi Yonasan says on the other hand, Rabbi Yonasan says, Lebay Aretz Nischalka, Haaretz. Rabbi Yonasan says, no, not true. Eretz Yisrael was divided up among the Jews who entered into Eretz Yisrael. In other words, the division was not made in accordance with the Jews who left Egypt, but rather again in accordance with the Jews who actually entered into Eretz Yisrael. How do we know that? Shneimar la'ila techalei ka'aretz benachala, because the pasuk says, la'ila, for these, meaning who's these? The Jews who enter into the land of Israel, for these you shall divide up the land. Incredible. Elamani mekayim l'shmos matos avosa min chalu. So here's the problem. So what do you do with the pasuk? See, again, it's Rabbi Yonasan. They say the truth is, just intuitively, Rabbi Yonasan sounds much better, right? Because it's easier for us to imagine a division of land amongst living people, right? So each tribe goes in, the land is divided up tribally, and then within each tribal portion, each tribal family is allotted something. So Rabbi Yonasan says everything is done in accordance with the Jews who entered into Eretz Yisrael. Here's the problem. According to Rabbi Yoshia, what does Rabbi Yoshia do with the pasuk that says Lishmos matos avosa min chalu? Do you have a pasuk that seems to indicate that the land is divided up amongst the Jews who left Egypt? So how do you reconcile How do you reconcile those two things? To which the Gemara says something very interesting. Mishuna nachalozu mikol nachalo sheba'olam. This is great. Because even according to Rabbi Yonasan is going to say like this, that this inheritance is different than every other inheritance. How so? So the Gemara says this. The Gemara says, shekol nachalo sheba'olam. In general, when it comes to inheritance, chayin, yarshim, mesim, the living inherit the dead. That's the way it works, right? Someone dies, and then again, the person who survives the deceased is the one who inherits that individual. I will say this is fantastic. V'kan mesim yarshim chayim. Here, listen to this. The dead inherited the living. Now what does this mean? I both say, get ready for this. I'm Rabbi. Rabbi says, Rabbi says, I'm going to give you a mashal. And I'll say, by the way, I'll also just tell you how interesting it is. It's fascinating to see how sometimes, right, the Gemara will deal with very complicated concepts, and it feels like it never throws us a bone, right? It never says, let me give you a mashal, let me illustrate this. It's fascinating that over the last 2 days, right, in yesterday's daf about the case of the inheritance tension between grandfather and brother of the deceased, right? The Gemara illustrated that case. Esau died, Avram's alive, Yishmael, right? Fascinating. Here, the Gemara says, mashal, just I don't know. All right, someone's going to have this homework. I don't know when it is that Chazal, you go through Yevamis. How much would you have loved for the Gemara to say, Em sholacham mashal, right? Let me give you a mashal about how this Yevamis case worked. Yet again, never happened. Interesting. I don't know when Chazal choose to give us a mashal, choose to illustrate cases versus not. Okay. Anyway, Rabbi, Em sholacham mashal. Rabbi, so let me give you a mashal about Adama. Listen to this. L'shnei achim kohanim shebi erachas. Now, both say, now this is actually not per se an Eretz Yisrael inheritance mashal. It's just an inheritance mashal or a division mashal. Two brothers who are kohanim who live in the same city. Now, by the way, the Rashbam adds in a very important piece of information over here. The last Rashbam on the daf, he says, Shnei achim kohanim v'hisnu. So I'll say this is very beautiful. Two Kohanic brothers, right? We'll call them Elazar and Itamar. Elazar and Itamar are brothers, and they decide amongst themselves that whatever truma they're going to get, they're going to equally divide. So we're going to pool our truma, right? You get your truma, I get my truma, whatever we get, we pool and we'll divide. So now watch this. So two brothers who are Kohanim, Shayu be'irachas, le'echad yeshlo ben echad, ve'echad yeshlo shnei banim. So we'll call it Elazar has one son, and Itamar has two sons. And now what happened? So now Elazar and Itamar go. So now the what happens? So now the sons go out to collect truma. So just keep this in mind. So Elazar's got one son, Itamar's got two sons. So now all three boys go out to collect their trumas. Right? What do they do? So what ends up happening? Now remember again, so Elazar's got one son, so Itamar's got two sons. Between the three of them, how many portions of truma have they collected? How many portions? 3. Right? Because remember again, each coin gets a portion of truma. So the 3 sons come back with 3 portions of truma. Now what do? Now both of them come back and bring it to their father. Now remember again, their fathers made a pact. What was their Kohanic pact? To go ahead and split everything 50-50. So therefore we'll say it turns out that what? 3 portions are going to come back to Elazar and Itamar, and they're going to be divided 50-50. Right? They're going to be divided 50-50, even though again, really, Elazar's family brought in 1/3, and Itamar's family brought in 2/3. So we'll say, so now listen to this. So therefore, what the Gemara is suggesting is as follows. Now what happened over here is that Lamaisa, the same thing happened by Rushas Eretz Yisrael. That essentially what ended up happening was as follows. Remember again, I will say this is Rabbi Yonasan's approach. Remember, Rabbi Yoshia says, very simple. The land was divided up amongst the Jews who left Egypt, right? Because remember again, the original plan was that they were going into Eretz Yisrael. Division was made according to those families, and that's what happened. When you got to Eretz Yisrael, those division lines remained. Rabbi Yonasan says, no, that's not how it happened. The land was divided up amongst those who entered into Eretz Yisrael. Here's the problem with that. What's the problem? The problem is a pasuk. What does the pasuk say? Lishmos matos avos samyin. Chalu, which makes it sound like the division of the land is done in accordance with those who left Egypt. So Rabbi Yonasan says, I got this. Here's how it worked. Get ready for this. The land was divided up amongst those who entered in Eretz Yisrael. After they received their portions, get ready, here it comes, get ready. The portions then went back a generation and it was pooled amongst those who left Egypt. Then it was equitably redivided or equally redivided amongst all of their heirs. So it's this fascinating, almost like two-generation inheritance process. So divided amongst those who left Israel, those who entered into Eretz Yisrael. Then again, that pool given back to the previous generation who left Egypt, and then split evenly amongst the heirs of those who left Egypt. That's how the Gemara gives this mashal. If you look at the Rashbam says over here, if you go backwards a little bit in the Rashbam, he says, Elamani mekayim l'shmos matos avosam. It's the first white line in the Rashbam. Demashma da'acha yotzim mitzrayim nami yeshon lechalek hanachalim. Umefarish, listen to this. Umefarish azad delahachi ahani l'shmos matos avosam yinchalu. Here we go. Dela'achar shenatlu b'nei Ruvain v'Shimon yud alef chalokim be'eretz mischalkin osam b'neihem lefi cheshbon matos avosam ki'ilu liyotzim mitzrayim dahainu Ruvain v'Shimon avosam. Okay, so the truth is we don't have to do it inside. I told you outside, but I would say that's the way it works. And that's why the Gemara gives that mashal. The same way, right? That when you had Elazar and Itamar, so remember what happened with Elazar and Itamar? Elazar and Itamar decided we're going to split all of our truma equally. What happens? Elazar has one son, Itamar has two sons. They go out to go ahead and get truma. Elazar's kid gets one portion, Itamar's kids also get a portion. So really, if you look at it, Elazar's family has one portion, Itamar's family has two portions, but then the brothers agreed to divide it. So all three portions go back into the brotherly pot, and they go out and divide it 50-50. Rabbi Yonasan posits that this is how Yerushan Eretz Yisrael worked as well. The land was divided up amongst the people who went into the land, then those portions were given back into the Yotzei Mitzrayim pool and divided equally amongst the heirs of those who left Egypt. A fascinating inheritance model. Oh, so we're going to see that. We're going to see action. So, by the way, that's where we're going to have to go back to the Mishnah, right? Because the Mishnah says that Beno Slavchad got Pishnaim. So, how does Pishnaim work in this? Hold on, Emir Hashem. All right, so we'll say, so again, just keep track of our shithas over here. Jose, I just want to tell you how incredible this is, right? How incredible this is that Rabbi Nachman says that the sukkah has the din of Eretz Yisrael. How's the sukkah's name? Eretz Yisrael. He says that's why every single time a person goes into the sukkah, ultimately again it's like being Ola Regel. Mamish Aliyah Eretz Yisrael. There's a lot of this, right? The Zohar brings down that the sukkah is Selah Dehevinusa, it's the protective shadow of Kadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Nachman has this comes the sukkah's Eretz Yisrael. So I just want to point out how incredible it is that we're learning about the division of Eretz Yisrael while sitting Kiviyachol in Eretz Yisrael itself. This Mamish is Eretz Yisrael. Tomorrow there's going to be like a shawarma thing over here. We'll put it in the middle. All right, it's not a bad idea. All right. And so now we're talking about the division of Eretz Yisrael. So number one, Rabbi Yoshia says, divided up amongst the Jews who left Egypt. That's the easiest, right? That's the simplest way to understand all of this. Rabbi Yonasan, divided up amongst those who entered into Eretz Yisrael, but in other words, yes, divided amongst those who entered Israel, and then their portions kicked back a generation and then redistributed equally amongst the heirs of those who left Mitzrayim. Next, Rabbi Shmuel Silber says, Amud Beis, Li'elu v'elu nischalka aretz. So this is very interesting. Rabbi Shmuel Silber says that in reality, the land was divided up amongst both groups. Both groups, those who entered into Eretz Yisrael and those who left Mitzrayim. Kedei lekayim shnei mikros halalu. So both say, now remember, what is shuling Rabbi Shimon Elazar to paskin this way? That the land was divided both amongst those who left Mitzrayim and those who came into Eretz Yisrael. Why does he feel compelled to interpret it that way? Why? Because again, Abba say, we have a problem. What's our problem? We have two psukim. Remember again, Abba say, we've got on one hand, l'shmos matos avosam yinchalu, the land will be inherited by the fathers, which sounds like again the Jews who left Egypt, and then it says la'ela techale ka'aretz b'nachala, la'ela to these. Who's the these? The Jews entering into Eretz Yisrael. So Rabbi Shimon Elazar says. So remember again, Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonasan are choosing to place primacy on one pasuk and then interpret the other one as a support. Rabbi Shimon Elazar says no, both of them are correct. The land was divided up amongst both of them. How could the land be divided amongst both of them? Ketzad. So listen to this. Ketzad. Haya miyotzi Mitzrayim, notel chelkom yotzi Mitzrayim. So if you're one of the Jews who left Egypt and you somehow still came to Eretz Yisrael, which could happen, right? Remember again. How can you be one of the Jews who left Mitzrayim and still coming to Eretz Yisrael? How could that happen? 20. Under 20, right? I would say there definitely was a population. Can you imagine being one of those? Can you imagine being one of those kids, right? Who saw Egypt, right? Obviously as a child, and then had the schus to see Eretz Yisrael, Am Yisrael, enter into Eretz Yisrael. If you think about it a little bit, this is almost to a certain degree like Lahavdu Alef Alfe Rive Avdalos, but like the generation of survivors, right? Who saw the terrible Churban in Europe, and then saw at least the beginning of a renaissance of Jewish life with the establishment of the state of Israel, the rebirth of, I should say, the creation of Torah Yiddishkeit here in America. So you have generations like that who are able to see these two extremes of Jewish life, the Churban and the binyan. So again, if you were a Jew who left Egypt, then lamaisa again haketza hayam yotzi Mitzrayim notel chelkom yotzi Mitzrayim, right? Hayam baya aretz notel chelkom baya aretz. And if you are one of the Jews who came in with ultimately again the Jews, if you were one of the Jews who entered into Eretz Yisrael, you'd get your portion of Eretz Yisrael. Now take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Hayam yotzi Mitzrayim. Now I will say so. Hachi perushim Hayam yotzi Mitzrayim v'lo Hayam baya aretz kigon Ruven shetz Mitzrayim who ben chaf v'holid banav midbar umeis Ruven ubanav hayu tefilin b'chnisasa. Now I will say. Now here's the problem with this. See, the problem with the way I just interpreted is how. So the way you read it is, it sounds like, well, if you left Egypt, right, and you came to Eretz Yisrael, then ultimately again you would inherit a portion of Eretz Yisrael. Here's the problem. The only way for that to happen is if you were under 20, right? If you were a child, right, under 20 at the time you left Egypt. The problem is if you were under 20 at the time you left Egypt, then what? You don't get an inheritance portion. So the Rashbam says the way this would work would be as follows. The Rashbam says it's the following, that halacha l'maisa, it has to be someone who left Egypt over the age of 20, which means they got an inheritance portion by dint of the fact that they are part of this group of Yotzim Yisrael. Then what happens? Their children, when they entered into Eretz Yisrael, were under the age of 20. That's what happened over here, right? So they call it Ruvain, right? So Ruvain left Egypt, he was over 20. Ruvain has children in the desert. But let's say again, Ruvain's children were under 20 by the time Klal Yisrael entered into Eretz Yisrael. So now his kids, when they enter into Eretz Yisrael, are too young to get their own portion in Eretz Yisrael. So therefore again, whose portion do Ruvain's kids get? His portion by dint of the fact that he was one of Yotzei Mitzrayim. Okay? So in other words, Rabbi Shmuel Silber says there's two different ways you could inherit land in Eretz Yisrael. Either you got it because you are part of the chevra that came into Mitzrayim, that left Mitzrayim. So Hayam Yotzi Mitzrayim, Nota Chelkim Yotzi Mitzrayim, Hayam Ibaya Aretz. And if you were again one of the chevra that came into Eretz Yisrael, Notal Chelko in Baya Aretz. Ultimately, again, then you get a portion with those who came into Eretz Yisrael. Now, both say so again. So therefore, Rabbi Shmuel Silber says it's not a contradiction. There's just two. Should make people sign a waiver before they sit in the sukkah over here. I'm telling you. I think we have Moshe David over there. All right. So the Gemara says like this. That essentially Shmuel Silber says it's not a contradiction in Psukim. The Torah is telling us that there are two different inheritance mechanisms. If you were one of the members who left Egypt, you would inherit that way. If you're one of the members who came into Eretz Yisrael, you'd inherit that way. Mikan. This is very interesting. What if both? What if you satisfied both criteria? Right now, look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Mikan. If you skip into the Rashbam into the intermediate wide lines, 3 lines in. V'yesh mefarshim mikan umikan ba'adam echad ma'iri shay miyotzi mitzrayim baya aretz kigon shiyotzi mitzrayim yeser mi ben shishim v'nichnas la'aretz. This is great. There is a possibility of someone who left Egypt and still came into Eretz Yisrael. How could it happen? You left Egypt above the age of 60. The gzeira of the Meraglim did not apply to anyone under 20 or to anyone above 60. So if you left Egypt above 60, and K'nai Nahara. K'nai Nahara, a bracha of longevity. So you entered into Eretz Yisrael above the age of 100, which technically means that Allah Lamaisa, you are miyotze Mitzrayim and mibai haaretz. You left Mitzrayim, and ultimately again you went into Eretz Yisrael. I will say, well, it's like reminiscent. What's the kina? It's like lahavdol. B'tzeisi Mitzrayim, b'tzeisi Yerushalayim. But there are some people, Baruch Hashem, who were zocha. B'tzeisi, right? I'm sorry. Ishtukar b'kirbi, right? But there are some who were zocha. Baruch Hashem to b'tzeisi Mitzrayim, and ultimately have b'nichnasti of Yerushalayim, b'nichnasti of Eretz Yisrael. So again, if you left Mitzrayim and you came into Eretz Yisrael, then the Gemara says Mikan Mikan, notel chelko Mikan Mikan. Ultimately, again, you get both. You get both. So both says this is fascinating. So again, just want to point out just before we go, let's just pause here for just a moment. So now we have 3 different models in inheritance of Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yoshia, it was simple. Rabbi Yoshia, I think, is the simplest. It was just divided up amongst those who left Mitzrayim. That's it. And somehow their heirs just took their father's portion. We have Rabbi Yonasan. Rabbi Yonasan says, divided up amongst those who entered into Eretz Yisrael. But again, the portion of those who entered into Eretz Yisrael was then kicked back a generation to Yotze Mitzrayim, then divided up equitably. Rabbi Shimon Elazar, both. You can either inherit by dint of being Yotze Mitzrayim, or by dint of being ultimately again L'nichnasei Eretz Yisrael. Right, Yotze Mitzrayim u'Baya Haaretz. Now, what happens if you are both Yotze Mitzrayim and Baya Haaretz? You get 2 portions. Now the Gemara says, listen to this. Meraglim. We'll say what happened to the portions of the Meraglim. Right, the Meraglim forfeited their portions in Eretz Yisrael. So what happened to the Meraglim? Yoshua v'Kalev natlu chelkam. This is incredible. So the Meraglim apparently, again, the Meraglim. Now here's what's interesting. If you look at the Rashbam says Meraglim afa pi shahaya libneihen bali aretz lito chelek avin shayim yotzim Yisrael afilu hachi lo not elo Yoshua v'Kalev natlu chelkan. Shabbos say this is incredible. The Meraglim apparently again were penalized. Not only did the Meraglim die, the families of the Meraglim lost their portions in Eretz Yisrael. I will say this is an incredible yesod. That we've spoken about this a number of different times, that what we do and how we live has an impact on our children. See, so often in life we spoke about this, so much of the psychology of chait is that we convince ourselves that what we do, first of all, only has very limited impact and only impacts me. And I convince myself that what I do is not going to impact in any way my children. And it's not true. Whatever a parent does, by definition, has a lasting impact on a child. It's incredible to see over here that the Meraglim didn't only impact themselves, but the Meraglim caused the forfeiture of their tribal inheritance, of their familial inheritance in Eretz Yisrael, to the point that their children did not have a portion in Eretz Yisrael. Who got the Meraglim's portion? Yoshua and Kalev. I just want to point out, say the positive, right? The positive also applies, which is that halacha l'maisa, the same way that what we see over here is that if I do something negative, it has a negative impact on my children. It's important to understand that the positive is true as well. Remember again, we saw Rabbi Nachman. What does Rabbi Nachman say? Right? The pasuk says, "Umaltem es levavchem v'es levav zarachem." So Rabbi Nachman writes in the Kutei Halachos, literally says, you will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants. Rabbi Nachman says that when a parent does tshuva, that koach of tshuva sends a ripple effect in his children as well. That when the parent goes ahead and ups his ruchnius game, when a parent decides, you know what, I'm going to live differently, I'm going to be different, that sends a surge of spiritual energy through the entire mishpacha. Okay, so in any event, so Meraglim and Yoshua, Yoshua, and Kalev took their portion. Mislonanim ba'adas korach. So we're going to talk about more of this. We'll say, so the mislonanim. Now, it's not clear immediately who the mislonanim are. Who are the complainers? You're like, I know all those guys, right? I know all those guys, right? They're usually, right, they sit in the back of the shul, right? In other words, right? Of course I know them, right? So we're going to see exactly who this refers to, right? But we'll come to me in tomorrow's daf, but we'll see who the mislonanim are. So the complainers and Adas Korach. So Adas Korach we know is Korach's assembly. So La Haya Lahem Chelek Ba'aretz. they lost their portion. But interestingly enough, Habanim notlu bischus avi avihen or bischus avi imoseyen. So we'll say this is fascinating. So apparently, again, the complainers, which again we'll have to see in tomorrow's daf who they were. I mean, the Rashbam already brings down. We can look at it. The Rashbam says, "Mislon va'adas korach, lekaman mefarish mislonim imsha ba'adas korach, shtahaynu chamishim u'masayim ish." So actually, we'll see in tomorrow's daf. The Gemara explains the mislonim are actually the member of the 250 men who are part of Korach's chevra. So they lost their portion. Interestingly enough, they lost their portion, but their children were still able to inherit from their grandfather, paternal grandfather, or maternal grandfather. So in other words, it's interesting. So as opposed to the families of the Meraglim, who completely forfeited their portion, Korach and his followers, they lost their immediate portion, but familially, their children were still able to inherit from paternal grandfather and maternal grandfather. Fascinating. I will say, you see from here something amazing, which is that Lamaisa, the severity of speaking negatively about Eretz Yisrael, right? How one has to be so careful about what it is that they say. That I see the Meraglim totally lost all portion of Eretz Yisrael. Right? The Meraglim have absolutely nothing. Yet Korach, with all of his terrible sinful behavior, they lost their immediate portion. Right? But Lamaisa, their kids were still able to inherit from maternal and paternal grandfathers. Okay, so the Gemara goes weiter. My mashma. So both say, so therefore, again, what we're left with over here, and just keep this in mind, because we're going to see, we'll try to see in Eretz Hashem, we'll see if there is some type of conclusion for how Eretz Yisrael is actually divided up. But three machlokes. Rabbi Yoshia divided up amongst those who left Egypt. Rabbi Yonasan divided up amongst those who entered into Eretz Yisrael. We'll call it with a little bit of a twist. Rabbi Shimon and Elazar, both, whatever gave you the right of inheritance, either again by dint of Yotzi Mitzrayim or Baya Haaretz. Good. Certain people lost their portion. Fine. My Masha Dahai, Lishmos Matos Avosam Biyotzi Mitzrayim Ksiv. So the Gemara is like this. How do you know? Now, remember, the Gemara is darshaning over here that the pasuk Lishmos Matos Avosam. When the pasuk says that the land is divided up in accordance with literally again the names of the matos of the families of the fathers, we assume that refers to the Jews who left Egypt, Yotzei Mitzrayim. The Gemara says, how do you know? How do you know that refers to Yotzei Mitzrayim? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you, Dilma, l'shratin kamarla, maybe it just means tribally. In other words, maybe it's not a reference to the Jews who left Egypt, but rather, again, maybe it's a reference ultimately, again, to the Shvatim, to the tribes themselves. Tichsiv, the Gemara says, "V'nasati osa lachem morasha ani Hashem." To which the Gemara says, "Yerushi lachem me'avoseichem u'liyotzi Mitzrayim kamerlu." Because the pasuk is saying, "V'nasati lachem morasha," will give it to us as an inheritance, and ultimately it's an inheritance from your fathers. And who is the pasuk talking to? The pasuk is talking to the Jews who left Egypt. So from here we see that halacha l'maisa. Ultimately, again, that it was an inheritance given to, that ultimately, again, the Shmos Matos Avosam refers to the Jews who left Egypt. I will say, let's do one more line, because you're pushing me. Fine, I'm going to give in, let's do one more line. We have 2 minutes. The sun's coming up. It's beautiful. Gemara goes weiter. It's also a longer Amud Beis tomorrow. The shorter daf from our starting. So, okay. Amar Papa Labai. Pishal Aman Amar Leotzim Zayim Nischal Kaaretz. Hainu Dichsiv. Lerav Tarba Nachalaso. V'Lamaat Tamit Nachalaso. So let's listen to this. So Bava says Tabai. According to the opinion that says that the land was divided up amongst the Yotzei Mitzrayim, which is the opinion of Rabbi Yoshia, so I understand the pasuk that says Larav Tarba Nachalaso, Tamit Nachalaso, meaning the halacha l'maisa again. How was it divided up? It was divided up amongst size. Right? We looked at the size ultimately again of the families or of the Shvatim, and we divided up like that. Top of Kuf Yud Ches 118a. Elaman de Amar. L'baya aretz, my larav tarbe nachalaso. But ultimately, again, I will say, according to the opinion that says that the land was divided up amongst those who entered into Eretz Yisrael, so what does it mean, right? Larav tarbe nachalaso. In other words, I will say, if you go with the idea that the land was divided up amongst the baya aretz, then what does that mean? If you came into Eretz Yisrael, then you got a portion. What does it mean? Larav tabanachala. So what does that possibly mean? That lamaisa, again, we're going to go ahead and divide it up amongst, again, a large, small. So by the way, if you take a look at the Rashbam says it's on Kuf Yud Ches 118a. The Rashbam says, Aval milarav tabanachala. So I'm sorry, I'm reading actually like in the short lines. In the short lines, it's 2, 4, 5 lines in. Ella milarav tarbe nachaloso makshe demashmo lemishaya rav b'yitzias Mitzrayim kidichsiv basrei lishmos matos avosam. So both say. So this is very interesting. Now remember again. The idea over here is these psukim. Keep walking. Keep walking. Right. So it's the Daf Yomi share. Yeah. So the Gemara says as follows. He asks for it every time. It's incredible. It's like a glutton. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara Paskin is like this. Here's the issue. The issue is that the pasuk that we're quoting over here of Larav Tarba Nachaloso, Velama'at Tamit Nachaloso, ultimately again that is juxtaposed to the pasuk of Lishmos Matos Avosam Michalu. So we've already established that Lishmos Matos Avosam, the Avosim Yichalu, that's a reference ultimately to Yotzim Mitzrayim. So now, if you go with the idea that the land was divided up amongst Yotzim Mitzrayim, then Larav, then it makes sense. But if you understand that it was divided up amongst those who entered into Eretz Yisrael, so how do you understand that pasuk? To which the Gemara says, Kasha. Gemara says, you know what, you're right, that is good Kasha. Rabbi says, so we'll stop over here for today. But again, we're not finished with this discussion by any stretch of the imagination. Still a lot more to do. Shkayach, everyone. Yes, Shalom, you want to lead?
Baruch Eloheinu Shochanum Shalom. Baruch Eloheinu Shochanum Shalom. Eloheinu Shochanum Shalom.